message for Labor Day because it's one of rest. We meet with Jesus again on a Sabbath day, just like we did last week, and just a chapter later, and we meet him again. And this whole message this morning is going to tell a parable, and it's going to be interesting to what we do with parables, but this parable is actually not about us. It's about Jesus, and we're going to talk about that this morning as we open up to Luke 14. This context of this passage is it's the Sabbath day, and Jesus is going to a Sabbath dinner at a leader of the Pharisees' house. And the very first words of the text that we're going to read is that Jesus went to this Sabbath meal at this Pharisee's house, and they were watching him closely. And what does it be like to be like Jesus? What I find about this particular text and this particular occurrence is it's always who's watching Jesus closely. It's the Pharisees, it's the religious leaders, and yes, it's Jesus, and yes, they're trying to catch him and into doing something. But one thing I found in all of my years in the Church of Christ, certainly in my years of even being a paid God talker in the midst of Christ Church, a paid minister, is there are always people watching you closely. And the people who watch you closely, I want to just say, like 100% of the time, are always the deeply religious. They are always trying to catch you in something, catch you in the world we live in, which is the, kind of the reformed, knowledgeable world. They're always trying to catch you in some theological error. And that's what they're trying to do with Jesus too, or they're trying to find some moral scruple that they can engage you on, and it just goes on and on and on. I honestly, I get Facebook friend requests from people like why do you want to be my friend? and the question is I think this happens. We're on social media. I'm on social media. People are watching you closely, and I actually think people friend people so that they can watch them closely, watch their lives. It's just a habit. And by the way, the watching closely, there's nothing restful about that. There's nothing restful if you're the one doing it. How much fun as it is if you just scour around people's lives trying to see when they're going to mess up. I think what's pointing to Jesus' points is exhausting. It's laborious. And we don't celebrate Labor Day so we can exhaust ourselves working and watching other people's lives closely. But that is what's going on here. But it's the Sabbath day. This is all ironic. So it's the Sabbath day, and they're specifically, and Jesus is being watched all the time, but they're specifically watching to see if Jesus will screw up on the day of rest. And there's nothing restful about this particular day. And I find it ironic again in our tradition when I actually became a minister in the PCA, the Presbyterian Church of America. One of the questions they always ask you is, what is your view of the Sabbath? You have to answer that question in the ordination process. We're consumed with it. And it's always been ironic, now that I'm a few years into the ministry, that we take this day of rest that Christ gave us, who is our rest, and we make ourselves anxious about whether we're doing the day of rest right. It's just what humanity does. We take God's gift, and then we get all anxious and unrested about whether we're actually doing this day right. We're really messed up, neurotic people is what we are. It's God's gift. He's actually going to address that very thing in this particular parable. This particular parable can frustrate us on numerous ends. I'll say up front, you'll find out that Jesus really isn't about winning. He's not in the winning business, and the parable will frustrate us when it comes to that, because we are all about winning. It's ingrained in our world and our society, our culture, our church culture. You may be here visiting or have visited at Nature Close this week or the last couple of weeks, and we want to win the church battle. And if you're here for the first time, don't go anywhere else. We want to win. Jesus just doesn't seem really interested in that mindset. And so he tells a parable, and I'm going to read it here. And actually, he heals someone. The text kind of skipped. It started in verse 1 and skipped to verse 7, but I actually think the whole thing is important because he actually heals someone before he tells the parable, and I think they're all part of each other. So one Sabbath day, Jesus went to eat dinner in the home of a leader of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were kind of the God talkers of the day. Quite frankly, they were people like me, more than likely. They were the leaders of the particular synagogues in that day. And people were watching Jesus closely. And there's a man whose arms and legs were swollen. In some versions it says he has dropsy. That's what dropsy is. It's a fluid building up on your lungs. It puffs you up. You can't. Congestive heart failure, or sometimes those kinds of things happen. And Jesus asked the Pharisees and the experts in the religious law, is it permitted in the law to heal people on the Sabbath day or not? So he's asking the experts in the law what their view of the law is. And of course, they didn't answer Jesus. They refused to answer, so Jesus touched the sick man and healed him and sent him away. Then he turned to them and said, which of you doesn't work on the Sabbath? If your son or cow falls into a pit, don't you rush to get him out? And again, they could not answer. So they don't answer a second time. So then Jesus notices, he's at this dinner, that all who had come to the dinner were trying to sit in the seats of honor near the head of the table. And in that day, a dinner would have been like this great U-shaped thing. And the host would be up where I am, and it would horseshoe out. And so you wanted to be as close to the host. If you were way in the back, it meant you weren't as important. The seats of honor, he gave them this advice: when you are invited to a wedding feast, don't sit in the seat of honor. What if someone is more distinguished than you has also been invited, and the host will come and say, give this person your seat. Then you will be embarrassed, and you will have to take whatever seat is left at the foot of the table. So he's saying, don't sit in that seat, because who knows, someone more important than you might show up, and then you'll be toast. It'll be embarrassing for you. Instead, take the lowest place at the foot of the table. Then when your host sees you, he will come and say, friend, we have a better place for you. Then you will be honored in front of all the other guests. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. By the way, he's actually quoting from Proverbs 25. There's a proverb that says, when you go to a dinner, take the low seat because you don't want to be embarrassed. So he's actually telling them things they already know from Scripture. Then he turned to his host and he said, when you put on a luncheon or a banquet, he said, don't invite your friends, brothers, relatives, and rich neighbors, for they will invite you back, and they will be your only reward. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Then at the resurrection of the righteous, God will reward you for inviting those who could not repay you. And there is two really interesting tidbits of a parable, or at least a metaphor that Jesus gives. Hard for us, maybe it's not so hard for us to understand the culture of the day. As I was thinking through this text, I thought, you could call this the parable of the school lunch. No different than when we were kids. No different now. If you walked into the lunchroom of any of our local schools, grade school, middle school, high school, there is a story being told at lunch. Who's sitting with who? Who's sitting alone? Who is petrified? I don't know if it's still true. I imagine it's still true. I know we get it. We get offered school lunches, right? Your kid can actually go and a lunch will be provided for them at the school. Who has to get a school lunch? Who's packed their lunch? That tells you some social standing right there. Who, if you've had your parents pack you lunch, what's in your lunch? School lunch is strenuous for the kids. I mean, even my kids have tried to work their schedule so that they are getting lunch at the same time as someone that they can know they can come and sit and eat with. Because there's something about eating, and there's something about food, there's something about sitting down that tells a story and always had, and here we are many, many years ago at the home of someone who's having a dinner, and where you sit seems to matter. Jesus gives us this text. Now here's what we do with the text. Is we read this. So he's done this on the Sabbath day. He's healed someone. I'm going to come back to that at the end. So he's healed someone. He's asked the question, what can we do on the Sabbath? Can I bring healing and rest to this man who's got dropsy, this man whose body is swollen, and when you look at him, he's puffed out and up, and probably, you just tell he's sick. And does it allow me to bring him rest? Or does it not allow for me to bring him rest? And so then Jesus tells these parables. And here's what we do with the parables of Jesus. We hear them, and then we expect, I can maybe even imagine some of you sitting here right now thinking, okay, where's he going to go? Because, man, I don't know. I'm having a party this week, and I've already sent out invitations, and I think maybe I've screwed up in how I've invited my guests, And so we read this, and we become anxious. And what I want to do is Jesus didn't tell these stories so that we could get some advice on him on how to send out invites and do it better next time. We tend to take these stories this way, and this isn't just good advice. Jesus didn't come and die on a cross so we would know how to send out invites when we host a dinner party. That's not why he had to come and die on the cross, so we could just send out invitations better. This parable, especially for me, is good news, because it addresses something of my heart. This is really a parable of grace, because Jesus knows the human heart. Jesus knows that all of us, every person in this room, is in the business of social scorekeeping. We are in the business of wanting to matter. We are in the business of wondering, even this week and this day, where we stand with people. And we're always reading the tea leaves as to where we stand with people. It may be related to an invite. It may be to how you sat down here this morning. It may be 100 different ways, but this is a parable of grace because Jesus knows our human heart. We are always pursuing, we're always jockeying for position, we're always pursuing. Even my kids, I only got one left, so he just wins all the time now. Noah wins all the time, but if you have multiple kids, and actually, I've seen it because I've driven the kids at Anchor and youth group, and Allie will tell you this as well. You get ready to get in the car, and you are taking a group of kids somewhere, and you're walking out to the car, and guess what one of the kids will say? Shotgun! Shotgun! Why? Because they want the best seat. They don't want, because usually if we're taking kids, they're all crammed in cars, and if you're shotgun, you don't have to be so crammed in the back seat where you have 3 or 4 people. The reason we yell shotgun is because it's the best seat in the car. As my kids got older and started to drive, I would just say, okay, you can drive. You can have the comfortable driving seat. We learn it young. We don't have to teach them that. I don't know who taught anyone the word shotgun. But we do it to advance ourselves. And here's how we do it. We begin to think, if I could just place myself in this position, and this is why this is such a parable of grace for me, because I began to think about my own life and my own story. Part of what Jesus is saying is when you come to this dinner party and you sit down and you're jockeying for position about where I can be, part of all that jockeying for position is this seeking to advance yourself, to advance your circumstance in life. And as I thought, this is my story. It's been the story of my life since I was a kid. And it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what gifts you had. I was a really, really good basketball player. And yet, even in the midst of that, when I go to the local gyms, or I would even go to the school gym, or I would be around other people, you know what I would do when I would walk into those gymnasiums? I would want to be seen. And I'd begin to scour and say, who are the athletes here? Who are they? Who do I need to get in connection with so that when the team is made that continues to play, I'm on that team. I want to be on that team. I'm short and I may not look like much, but if you could just see me play, I could be long. And I wanted to be seen. And then I grew up, and then you get older, and there's lots of people who are better basketball players than you, and the reality sets in, and then it's grades, But even more than grades, because grades almost for me is that's who I was, and I couldn't change it. But then for me, I was single for a good part of my 20s, and I would spend my weeks and my weekends trying to figure out who I could be with to connect me with the people I needed to be with. If I could just get an invite to that group of people going out on Friday night. And I was consumed with that. You would think it would end. It doesn't. You get married. You have children. Then we want our kids on the best teams and the best schools, and we're always jockeying for position. Then I became a minister, and I asked the question, boy, how could I advance myself as a minister of the word? I'm in a denomination. Boy, wouldn't it be neat if I got an invite to that group of pastors' luncheon? Could I not get an invite? And here's the grace of the parable. Jesus does this on the day of rest. And he says all of those efforts to jockey, all of those efforts to place yourself in the exact right position, so the exact right circumstance that you think and I think can manipulate ourselves into getting ourselves the best possible circumstance in life, it's exhausting. It is exhausting because it never ends. And the question underlying this parable, the question underlying all of those things, even the question underlying shotgun, is this reality: am I worthwhile? Am I enough? And Jesus is saying, when you come to this host, whether you're a host, will they repay me? Can they repay me? Can they do something back for me? that will help me. I mean, you begin to read this story, and not only is this a parable of grace for your own heart and life, it's a parable of grace to the great commandments to love the Lord your God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. Because I can tell you, when you're jockeying for position, when I'm jockeying to be seen, whether it's when I play basketball, whether it's I'm single, whether it's when I'm a pastor, I am all consumed with myself, and my head is not up, and I am not interested in others. In fact, I'm using others to advance my end. And you know what the lie in all of that is I could become pretty adept at using and manipulating and getting in the right position. But you know what was happening in the end? I was the one being used. I was the one who was completely under the control of everyone else. And Jesus gives us this parable for our own hearts and for my heart. The point of the whole parable is not so we know who to invite or not invite to the table. The point of the parable, even as we get to the end, is who are you trusting? Who are you trusting? Because all of your labor, all of your jockeying for position is you trying to place yourself in the advancement so that someone will do something for you, or you will be able to get somewhere else in life. And the question of the parable is, who are you trusting? Are you trusting and resting in your own labors, or are you going to trust in the labor of Jesus Christ? Are you going to trust in his labor, the resurrected one, the one who at resurrection will give you everything your heart ever wanted, and not in the way we think, because he gives us his finished work. He gives us the belonging. He gives us the identity. He is the resurrection finisher. When you come to a dinner, don't come in proud and haughty and sit somewhere where you weren't supposed to sit. But come and acknowledge your rightful place of who you are. And let someone else come and bring you to the top. Let someone else come and place you in the seat of honor. Let someone else do it. And the whole point of the parable is that Jesus is saying as he heals this man, I am your place of rest. Is this legal to do on the Sabbath? Well, of course it's legal to do, because I'm the one who raises up. I am the host of the table. I am the host of the dinner. And I am the one who brings people and calls people. I call the poor, the lame, the crippled, and the blind. And oh, what is an honor to be called by him. The table. That's where we're at here this morning. Wouldn't you know it, we're at a dinner party. And Jesus really is the host. It's his blood and it's his body. We're here this morning at a dinner party. And guess what we've done to the table? We've done exactly what he has encouraged us not to do. What has this table become? At least in the tradition that I grew up in. The table has become a reflection of who's in and who's out. We're at a dinner party. Why do they get to eat at the table? I saw them this week. They shouldn't be at the table. This table becomes a place of legal hair splitting, and it becomes, ironically, even for me, because I remember these days, I used to dread the Sundays where we had the Lord's table, because all it did was make me anxious. I'd be told I needed to clean my life up. I would wonder if I cleaned my life up well enough. I would wonder if I've done it well enough. This table was anything but a table of rest. And gosh, we got to ask ourselves that question. Why? Why would God give us a dinner and tell us to come to this dinner till he comes again, so that we would be frantically anxious every time we came to dinner? I mean, is that why we've come to dinner this morning? Is that why? So that we will be made anxious again? Is this the school lunch? Is this the place where we evaluate what goes on? Is this the place where we closely watch? Right? That's what the religious leaders were doing. When I grew up, this was a place that we closely watched. Why do they get to come? Why are they up here serving communion? We're at dinner right now. And who does God want to come? Did we lose our text? Can I still go back to this text? Okay, yes. Go back to the text, maybe the last slide of the text. Then he turned to his host and it says, when you put on a luncheon or a banquet, he said, don't invite your friends, relatives, and rich neighbors, for they will invite you back and they will be your reward. You know what? If you're a good enough manipulator, it'll work for you. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Who does God invite to his dinner table? I think he's telling us. The poor, the lame, the crippled, and the blind. God invites people to his table who have nothing to offer him back. Those are the people he wants at his dinner. The ones who could never pay him back. The ones who know that it has to be Jesus plus nothing equals everything. Those are the ones that he wants. And you may be sitting here this morning and thinking, well, here is the very his table. If he knew what I know about myself, he would have never invite me to come. And he is saying, I do know everything there is to know about you, and I am inviting you to come. Who can come to this table? It's the people that think they don't belong at the table. It's the people that don't look at the table as if they are jockeying for position, some kind of position in some kind of religious hierarchy. It's for the crippled and the lame. It's for the children, because unless we become like children who are completely dependent upon their parents, we don't even know what the kingdom of God looks like. This table, this party is a protest to all of our culture that blesses the powerful, that blesses the strong, that blesses the ranking, that blesses all of the jockeying, that blesses all of the competing. This table is for you, and it is for me. Because Jesus has come. And Jesus is always looking to the back of the room. And he's saying, come. Come. Come in my resurrecting power. We've turned this table into a table of people, at least in my tradition, that was only offered to people who we could, in some outward way, begin to look at their lives and say, you know what? They're paying God back well, so they can come. That was the criteria. They are paying, look what they've done with the good news. They are paying God back well. And so they can come. Jesus, he comes and says, this table is for people who have nothing to pay me back with. They can come. I want to bless them. I want to extend my body and my blood to them. I want my table to be for all the losers. Frank Sinatra, didn't he have a song like, here's to all the losers? God bless them all. The people who could never offer anything back to God. And for the people who have nothing to offer back, God says, let's party. And let's praise and let's sing over the host who says, you know what? Forget your social scorekeeping. Forget your ranking. Forget your competing. You're tired and you're exhausted. And so I'm going to give you a parable of grace that says you don't have to do that anymore. You just have to not be enough and let your host come and take you by the hand and bring you up front and then say to you, this is my body broken for you, and this is my blood shed for you. I did not tell, Jesus says, this story so that we would agonize and fret about how we could do dinner parties better. I gave you this story so that you would know. And the reason I've come on the cross is for your forgiveness of your sins. And when you are forgiven, and I am forgiven, we don't need to jockey. We don't need to compete. We don't need to call shotgun. Because he's done it all. And all we have to do is come. And that's what we're going to do right now.